And we're back.
Welcome back, everybody, to the best podcast that has ever existed, specifically on this channel, starring these two people, Dr. Patrick Armshaw
and Dr. Christopher Silverstein. We are doctors,
but not doctors, and we are happy to be here.
Yeah, we are happy to be here on a sunny day here in London.
I know.
Before the next heat wave approaches.
Because Monday and Tuesday, it's going up to 31 degrees Celsius. Which is like, seriously,
that's like 90. That's 90 degrees. That's over 90 degrees. And these are buildings that are designed to trap in heat, not release them.
Exactly.
This is going to be a hot one, folks. And they don't really do air conditioning in this country.
Yeah.
Patrick, who is from Florida, can't handle the heat. Well, I can.
It's really funny because you're from Chicago.
I am.
And I think a lot of people assume, Chris, that the farther north you go, the cooler and more clement the climate.
Yeah, that'd be stupid to think that.
Yeah, that is entirely wrong.
Yeah, that's...
like in Florida, when I was growing up in South Florida, just outside of Miami, the highest we get would be like 92, right?
Yeah,
and it'd be like a high of 92 for the record, for like 9 months out of the year. It would rain torrentially at 4 p.m. every single day. You'd set your watch by it.
That's right. Yeah. I remember that too when I was living in Florida during the summer. Yeah.
And the thing is, you may ask yourself, well, how do people survive in such a barren and horrific landscape? And the answer, of course, Chris, is air conditioning. Everything is air conditioned.
Inside in highly air conditioned areas.
Absolutely. So you walk outside, you burst into sweat, then you walk back inside, and then you freeze to death. And that's how we educate our high schoolers.
And college students and university. When I was at FSU, when you would come in out like in August, and you would come in out of like from the outside and you go into the Bellamy building.
Oh my God!
And like you would sit down in class, and you'd be like, "It's really, really cold in here." One day, my shirt actually froze to my chest. Like I pulled my shirt off my chest, and just like, "Good Lord, it froze to my chest." Like that's wild. Like that is absolutely wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in case you couldn't tell, it's hot, and it's going to be hot for a while. And we're just going to have to deal with it, drink a lot of water, and keep the windows open as best as you can.
Ooh, actually, I will slightly disagree there. Keep your windows open at night so the nice cool air comes in. But then at 10 o'clock a.m., shut the windows, close the blinds, insulate, keep that heat out. And so this is the way to do it.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it.
That's how I'm surviving now.
That's how you're surviving. We got different plans on how to survive because we got different. We live in different places.
That's true, actually. That's
with different sets of insulation, right? So I need to, because at night I need all that heat to get out, and I keep up the blackouts. Anyways, we've been talking about this for way too long.
You're entirely right.
Yeah,
the world has not stopped. Politics marches forward, and we got more madness to unpack here, don't we?
We do have madness, and we have madness this time. We're starting in the UK.
We're starting in the UK?
Yes, this time we are starting in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Well, Chris, now that is unprecedented on this show, I believe.
I think it is unprecedented on this show, given the disaster that is American politics and the great danger it poses to the world. You have to understand how bad things are messed up in the UK for us to make a hard shift to make the UK the top topic.
It really is an indication.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So without any further ado, let's talk about the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, and the welfare bill. Now, of course, everybody knows I work for the S&P Westminster Group and have done for quite a while. So I've seen my share of votes and governments come through. Importantly, though, there is one rule I want you to remember while we're telling all these stories. The government never loses. That's the rule of British politics. The government, that is the governing party, in this case, the Labour Party, before it was the Conservative Party, they're not supposed to lose. If they lose, you're supposed to have an election, shut everything down, because you're supposed to have an unassailable majority. You're supposed to govern without question. That's the plan in the UK.
Well, that's how governments get formed in a parliamentary system, right? Is that you can't even form a government unless a majority of parliament is willing to back you, right?
Yeah, that's how you're supposed to do it. But in a lot of other European countries, as we talked about before, the way you form that government is by combining different parties together, right? It's not supposed to be just one party that has ultimate power over everything,
but rather a coalition that governs under an agreement, right?
Under agreement, because they use proportional representation for the voting, and they get approximately the same amount of seats as they got with the vote. Now, in the United Kingdom, as we talked about before, we don't have that system. So the Labour Party got approximately 34% of the vote, and they got over 66% of the seats.
Now, hold on, Chris, because I think for those of us who are not math geniuses, I think that's worth unpacking a little. Yeah. Because to my understanding, 34% of the votes, 67% of the seats.
Yeah.
I think the second set of numbers is larger than the first.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it's not a quirk. It's a design of the UK system. Is that for some reason, no government has been formed on more than 50% of the vote, and as long as this country can remember. And I think the highest amount we've ever had is maybe 45%. So
right. And that would have been, I think, under Thatcher most recently, right?
Maybe Thatcher, maybe Cameron, maybe the first or maybe second Cameron, who knows? But the point being is that the government they use this phrase, they have a mandate from the people. They don't. They never have a mandate. A majority of the people vote against the government in almost every election. And to solve that problem in your other European countries, they have the coalitions. But in the UK, you just ignore it and pretend like it happened. So we're working with that kind of voter mandate here. And over the past year, because it's next week, it'll be a year since the election, since Labour went from being the opposition to the governing party with a huge majority of about 167 or something. They have a ton of members.
I mean, like 2/3 of Parliament sits with the Labour Party.
That's right. And that's an important number to remember. 2/3 of Parliament are effectively Labour Party. It's about, at the election, it was 411. Now it is 400. Because they've had to kick out some people, and some people have they've had to kick out a lot of people for various reasons, at least 11.
Well, they have them to spare, Chris.
Well, that's just it. They do have them to spare. So as we talked about before, the Labour Party have been implementing effectively a right-wing economic plan.
My understanding is that their economic plan has more or less been predicated on the idea that after Liz Truss shat the national bed and caused interest rates to spike, and again, my mortgage payments to increase by 50% thanks, Tories. We've had
Liz.
Right? So we've had this issue of, well, the interest rates the government has to pay are so high, all this money is just going into interest. Yeah. If we can reaffirm our commitment to paying our debts, reaffirm ourselves to sound fiscal policy, debt markets will chill the hell out. Interest rates will drop down. The government will have to spend less on interest and therefore can afford to spend more on other things. And I think this is not a crazy idea in the abstract.
Yeah.
How's it been working out in practice, Chris?
In practice, it's not been working. The problem is that they're trying to balance those books in the backs of the poor, just like the Conservative Party did. They're trying to take down the welfare benefits schemes and systems and try to get the money from there because it's politically expedient. Everybody knows that people on benefits, what we would call welfare in America, people on welfare, all of them don't really need it. All of them are just lazy. All of them are just asleep, and they don't need any help. Unless you're one of those people and they need all the help that you can get, please don't touch it, Medicare. So so it's politically easier to go after the poor than it is after the rich, who could hide their money in various places.
That's who can afford lobbyists to make it very clear to you why you should do no such thing.
Exactly.
And of course, let's not forget that poor people don't own newspapers, Chris.
Poor people don't donate to political parties either.
That's also true. That's a funny fact.
Yeah.
Funny but little known fact.
So we're going a lot in a very circuitous path here to get to this point. Earlier in one of the very first things the Labour Party did when they were in government was not get rid of the 2-child cap. That was one of the votes that we instigated during the King's Speech. But now their new plan is to completely and radically change the personal independence payment system and the universal credit system. And so in a very short amount of time, over the past 16 years, if you are sick and you can't work, or you can only work a little bit, the government I mean, well, over more than 16 years, the government has been able to give you some money to help you live your life, so you don't starve to death or you aren't able to, crawl to work. If you've got multiple sclerosis, or if you've got, hidden diseases, doesn't look like you got an issue, but issues of chronic fatigue, for example, right?
Absolutely.
So you can't work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, every day.
Or the types of work that you can do are quite limited, because let's say, for example, you have a spinal condition that prevents you from being able to sit in one place for hours at a time in order to do work. You have to do things like stand up, you have to move around, otherwise the pain overwhelms you, right?
Right.
Now, does that mean that you cannot work? Maybe, no. But it certainly means that you can't work certain types of jobs, and whether or not you can get the kind of jobs that you can do, well, that's not a thing where you just wake up one day and say, you know what? I want a job, and then you go get one. Instead, you have to apply for work. It takes time. There's a reason why the successive governments have realized that you can't just sort of like throw people into the labor market and expect that everything's going to work out for the best. Life happens, and disabilities happen, and people become unable to work for a period of time before being able to work again. And the question is, if you suffer from a disability, should that mean that your life gets wrecked so that you're incapable of getting the kind of work that you could when you are again able to work?
And as the Labor Party, that party is was known as the party of the people, the party of effectively the poor. So,
very much so.
Their job was to use the government to rise the people at the lowest tiers of society up higher and higher and higher, and effectively do it at the price of the highest tiers of society.
Exactly. To level the playing field.
Level the playing field, yes. To ensure that people could go to school for free, to have a 5-day work week, things like that.
So you didn't have to be born to rich parents in order to aspire towards a life of decency.
Exactly. That's the idea. That's what left-wing politics is effectively about, and that's what people thought the Labor Party and labor politics were about, and they were for a long time until now, where the government has implemented this new bill, which would have taken, I think, effectively hit 800,000 people and messed with their PIP payments, their personal independence payments, would have messed with their universal credit payments, taken them off of it. Maybe, and nobody knows what they were going to do if that, went away. So when the government put this bill down, there's a thing called a reasoned amendment. Now, it doesn't change the bill. It just gives the country and the parliament a reason to vote against it. So normally opposition parties put down reasoned amendments, and normally the opposition party puts down, like the main opposition party will put down one, but a lot of others will put down one. And the speaker will choose the largest opposition party's amendment or whatever. But sometimes he chooses a cross-party amendment with Labor Party or a bunch of different people in it, because it has a strong massive feeling around the House.
Okay.
About 2 days ago, a reasoned amendment was tabled in the House. Guess how many names were on it at that time?
Was it more than 3?
It was more than 3, and it wasn't. And guess the party that tabled it.
I'm going to guess it was I don't know. Was it the Monster Raving Loony Party, Chris?
They're not in Parliament.
Oh no!
Try again.
Damn. I don't know. I'm going to say the most Labor. Was it the Labor Party?
It was part of the Labor Party. It was part of the Labor Party, and it was over 108 members signing that particular piece. Reasoned amendment.
That's quite a large number, Chris. That's quite a large number of Labor members tabling this reasoned amendment, I would say.
That is a huge number now, and it's an important number as well, because like I said before, the majority in the House of Commons for the Labor Party is about 167. Now that number is 163 or 167. It's one of those two. I'll check. But the problem is that some of those people will never vote. There are 7 members of Parliament from Sinn Féin from Northern Ireland who will never come down because they don't take the seats. They can't take the oath to the monarch. So that takes 7 out. There are 3 deputy speakers, and then there's a speaker. There's 3 deputy speakers. They don't vote anyway. So the number is actually about 156, 157. All right. Now you take out 100 members from that. Then you have a problem, because you only have a majority in the 20s and the 30s. You need to. And so a government that has a majority of over 150 passing legislation on a majority of about 20 or 30, because over 100 of your own members refuse to back it, means that you got a huge problem. And the number of people opposing it has gotten larger in the past couple of days.
This is the kind of thing where, if that pattern continues, we could see a large enough rebellion in the labor ranks that passing this bill becomes actually a live question. Yeah.
That's where we are. We are sitting in a place where, normally in what happens in Parliament is that there's always this big conversation about rebellion. Doesn't matter what the party is, and you say, "Oh, there's going to be a rebellion. There's going to be a rebellion." Oh. And the first time you get really excited. Of course, that was 16 years ago for me. Now I'm jaded and old, and I said, normally I'm like, whatever. It never comes to fruition. And for a little bit, when I heard about this the first time, I'm like, that's too many on the wrong side of that for the government. But the government's working really hard this weekend, calling people up basically, and they've made a bunch of concessions. I don't know which ones they've made, but they're basically capitulating left, right, and center to keep the bill alive. But again, it's just part of this larger issue with left-wing politics that seems to be running towards the right wing, assuming that doing what the conservatives or reform would do is going to pull some of those votes from the other side to you. And that's never, ever going to happen.
It's a very strange thing, right? To sort of believe that if someone is a dedicated reform voter, like Nigel Farage is what they want, they are signed up, ready to go, because he is, in favor of the things that you were in favor, right?
Right.
That you might say, but on the other hand, why not vote for Labour instead? Because while I disagree with them on like literally everything else, there's one thing where they've moved closer to my position, but still not as close as Nigel Farage's.
Yeah.
Like it's a very strange belief about how politics works. And I think it comes down to a sort of assumption that an over reliance, if you will, on the rational voter theory.
Yeah.
Because the rational voter theory, for those of you who haven't heard of this, it's the idea that we should think about voters as being rational beings presented with a menu of options. They choose the option that is closest to them, and they're constantly aware of where the options are. So if the options move over time, voters are paying attention. They can tell if a party moves closer to their preferences, then they'll say, fantastic. And they will reward them with their votes if they move closer than some other party does. And this is fun. This is a fun thing. You can sort of model this mathematically. It's really very nice. And I think it's not a reasonable way of talking about how politics works today. I think during periods of consensus, right? Like, say, from the 1950s through the 1970s, right, in the United Kingdom, where you sort of had more or less an agreement on a strong welfare state. And then the question is, well, how much do we fund it, right?
Yeah.
But there's still the idea, obviously, the NHS is sacrosanct.
Right.
There's the idea that, we're not going to be spending all of our money on the military because, well, we're no longer a global power in Great Britain. Okay, well, fine. But there's a general understanding of what the playing field is. And you can argue about where on that playing field you should be. That's the kind of situation where the rational voter theory was created. And I think it describes that state of the world relatively well. But right now, I don't think that's what's going on. I think you have a much harder situation where people's political identities are much more based around narrative, and much more based around like the stories that are being told.
Yeah.
And so your position on policy matters way less than whether or not you're able to present to the voters a story of who you are, what it is you're doing, where it is you're going, and why you are of them.
Yeah, and it's also go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think that's the issue with Labour is that they're still playing the old style politics. They don't understand that Nigel Farage has got his narrative ready to go, laid down, very, very strong, and therefore he can afford to do all sorts of crazy things on policy without threatening his connection to his voters. He can talk about, doing incredibly left-wing economic things, despite being an ultra-right. Well, not a political party, but a political thing
or a political company.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and I think that the left is is not fully coming to terms with that. There are some on the left who are, but the money and the organization power, I don't think that they really fully understand that yet. And so basically, this vote is coming up on Tuesday, and we're going to see what happens. Now, Labour didn't have, at the point that I, last checked, there was still a majority for Labour to win, but by a very small majority. and I'm sure that they are peeling people off left and right. But it's still going to be I think the bill will probably pass, right? But it'll pass with such a small majority that you're going to be asking yourself, like, where is Keir Starmer? Where's the power of the Labour Party? Hang on, give me.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. Sorry, I thought that there was going to be an ambulance passing. But yeah, we're at a serious place here for the Labour Party, and I think we're going to talk about this more next week. But we've gone through this a lot. So why don't we move on to the next topic, and let's not take too long on it, even though it's very, very important. Just before, well, we don't have 4 or 5 hours.
That's true.
Just before we went on the air, just before we started recording, we're not live. The U.S. Supreme Court brought down its ruling on, I believe it's universal injunctions.
Yeah. So this was the case Trump v. CASA Incorporated, the state of Washington and the state of New Jersey. For those of you who are sort of following along at home, this was the case regarding birthright citizenship. So just to give the quickest of rundowns, under the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, people born in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens, full stop. And again, subject to jurisdiction means the laws apply to you. So who would not be covered by that? We're talking about diplomats, because they have diplomatic immunity. They're not subject to the laws of the United States. And at the time it was created, that also included Native American tribes. However, that is very much no longer the case. Native Americans are American citizens. That happened in the 1920s. So we're really just talking about the kids of diplomats. That's the only people that you could possibly be talking about who are born in America, who are not American citizens. I mean, also theoretically, if an army invaded and that army was composed of pregnant women, then their children would not become citizens because, they'd be the children of an invading army. But we've talked enough about the legal issues with invasion, I think. So I'll just refer everyone to previous episodes.
Yeah.
So for the moment, we'll just say this. The U.S. Constitution, very, very clear on who becomes a citizen through birth. The Trump administration, when it came in January, declared almost on its first day, I think.
Definitely on its first day, yeah.
That it was no longer going to recognize the citizenship of those born to undocumented immigrants.
They said persons whose parents are born outside this jurisdiction of the United States when the kids are born. Again, that line makes no sense.
Yeah,
because it's garbage.
Well, yeah, because the idea is that if you're going to claim that undocumented immigrants are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, then you can't you can't convict them of crimes or even arrest them for crimes. Yeah. All you can do is expel them from the country. So Donald Trump has spent a lot of time talking about crimes committed by undocumented immigrants and how they're the worst of the worst. And I don't think he means to say that, therefore, if someone commits murder, we should let them go free. Presumably, you do want to be able to have a trial and things like that. But I don't want to put words in the president's mouth, I guess. But anyway, so they've put out this idea that they're simply not going to recognize the citizenship of American citizens, which is gibberish. This is, legally speaking, this is nonsense. This is not a thing. It is completely and totally unconstitutional. It has no legal backing whatsoever. It is basically an announcement by the administration that they intend to break the law.
Yes.
And you think that would be a problem for the courts.
The Supreme Court.
Wow. And that's the funny thing, of course. You've given the game away because the lower courts, the federal courts, were immediately like, well, this is nonsense. You cannot do this. You cannot take away the citizenship of American citizens without any kind of due process whatsoever. This is absurd. You have no powers here, Now, so what do you do if the administration does this? Well, what the lower courts did was they said, all right, we are issuing an injunction. We are preventing you from acting in this manner towards anybody in the United States because you simply don't have the power to do it. And that's true no matter what state you're in, no matter where you are. That just has nothing to do with whether or not the government has this power.
Right.
Which, makes sense. The problem is the Trump administration then appealed to the Supreme Court. And the case that was just heard wasn't about whether or not the government has the power to do this.
Yeah.
Because even the Supreme Court, even this Supreme Court, I would argue, Chris,
yeah,
could not possibly say that actually Donald Trump is right and the Constitution doesn't mean what it literally says, because that would just be a declaration that there's no such thing as a constitution at that point. Like that's
oh no, the clerics in the country just shuts down.
Well, that's
and,
the thing. That
and
it would
White
be
House
the
becomes
unmaking.
yeah,
Exactly. So yeah, but what they did do was rule on the issue of universal injunctions, and they ruled that universal injunctions, i.e., where a state court or a federal district court says, "Well, the government doesn't have the power to do this, so we are preventing the government from doing this. If they do it, they're going to be violating court order." The Supreme Court has now decided that that's not a thing. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And that is fun because that overturns 200 years of jurisprudence.
So it means basically, if I can try to analyze this, is that is this no? Actually, a better question is this just in this case? Because let's say that a federal court decides to make a universal injunction on killing people or something, or something completely just like, here's something that you can't do anymore, and you can't do it across the United States. Does this now mean that you can do it? Just they can't do that. They can't say that across the United States murder is bad.
Well, basically, what's going on here is that the courts are no longer in a position to say, well, the government doesn't have the power to do it, so therefore it can't do it anywhere. Instead, what the court is saying is the government doesn't have the power to do it to the people who sued.
Right. So yeah,
the government can't go after the people who sued them in this case,
right.
But they can potentially do it to literally anybody who was not a party to this case, which means that, well, effectively what they're saying is the government can try doing it to someone else, this thing that they have no power to do.
Right.
And then that person could sue them in federal court. And then that federal court would say, okay, well, you can't do it to them either on account of
it's illegal.
Can't do it because it's illegal, but only to the person who they tried to do it to. So, in other words, this is the kind of thing where you could conceivably have the government do this to millions of individuals.
Yeah.
And then the courts would have to hear millions of cases.
Yes.
And determine each and every one of them in the exact same way, because the law is the exact same for all of them. There is no difference in the law here, because we're not talking about state law where which state you're in determines what the laws are and therefore what the outcome is going to be on the same set of facts. Instead, we're talking about constitutional law that applies literally throughout the entirety of the United States. It cannot differ from state to state. The outcome cannot be different from one case to another case, which means that what they've done is just sort of, announce that the courts cannot recognize the most obvious thing in the world, that there is no such thing as national law, in a sense, which is, I would argue, legal insanity.
Well, but it's not. I don't think it's insanity. I think it's just part of the plan. I think that the group of people on the court believe in the universal executive power. That that the framers decided that the president should be like a king, despite the fact that we actively fought a war against that concept.
Not to do that very explicitly.
And yet here, and you can, like, the people that they selected, the people that they chose, and we were talking off camera earlier about these literal interpretation people of the Constitution. But the literal interpretation of the Constitution doesn't really make any sense, because obviously there are still things in the Constitution that we don't, like the 3/5 clause, that we don't care about anymore. There's plenty of things that we kind of skim over or we've changed with an amendment. But obviously, if you're an originalist, do you care about amendments? I'm sure you care about the second one.
If you want,
but you don't care about the other 26, right?
Well, okay, so let's make a distinction here, I think, between originalism as a judicial philosophy and originalism as it is actually practiced in the American legal system. Originalism, in theory, in the same sense that, like, communism, in theory, is very logical and makes sense, right? So originalism says, if you're trying to interpret the law, if you're trying to interpret the Constitution, if you're trying to interpret, statements by Congress or what have you, then the way to do it is to try to figure out, okay, well, what did they mean when they wrote it at the time?
Right.
Right. And that has a lot to recommend it, because if you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what do they mean by bear arms, for example?
Well, obviously they meant giant pairs of bear arms that everybody would have.
I mean, that would be relatively hard to support, sadly, although that would be adorable. No, instead, like, basically it's the idea that, all right, well, what did they mean when they wrote it? That's what they meant. If we want to change it, we'll have to change it, right? We can't just reinterpret things to make it make more sense to our modern sensibilities.
Right.
We have to deal with the law as it was created. And I think that there is something to be said for that. And if you're going to be consistent with it, then you're going to say that the same is true for each amendment that then was passed to the Constitution.
Yeah.
Amendments are the Constitution in the same way that the original Constitution without the amendments is the Constitution. And so therefore, if you're interpreting the 14th Amendment, you would look to what was meant at the time when the 14th Amendment was passed.
Yeah.
What did they mean by, not subject to the jurisdiction, for example?
Yeah.
Well, they were really clear what they meant about that. In all the speeches in Congress, in all the stuff that was written about it at the time, what it was meant was, not diplomats and not Native American tribes on account of our laws don't apply to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have that answer. If you're an originalist, well, okay, then you're going to look at that and say, fantastic. Same thing with, amendments regarding extending the right to vote to women. What did they mean at the time when they wrote it?
Yeah.
None of this means that by doing this, you're going to get an outcome that is just, or they're going to get an outcome that even makes sense in a given case. But you are at least going to have a consistent set of rules and apply them evenly, and everyone knows what the situation is. And if the outcome is ridiculous, people have the power, theoretically, to change the Constitution or to vote in new Congresses that can change the laws. Now, what is it that actually happens in the American legal system? Well, an interesting example of how originalism happens can be seen with the Supreme Court deciding in the case regarding Biden's attempt to use his powers under the, I can't remember exactly which act it was, but there's a power that gave him emergency powers to be able to alter or eliminate student loans for student loan holders.
Right.
They ruled that or doesn't mean or, it really means and. So they're just going to change the word without changing the word. We're just going to pretend it means something literally different. We're going to pretend that logic isn't a thing.
But so, politics is.
Politics very much is, Chris.
And I think that's where we're getting to here, because I mean, this is just part of an ongoing and continuing assault upon liberal democracy. That and this is what fascists do. They go after the immigrants first. They try to change or denaturalize people. Mm-hmm. And in America, that's very difficult. That's why the Federalist Society and the rest of them has been spending the past 40 years trying to get their people in the judiciary so that they can do this thing. And it's had moderate success, right? Yep. I mean, to have the majority in the Supreme Court, it's obviously very successful, but they don't have a majority of people clearly that agree with them in the lower courts. Yeah. Because the lower courts consistently agree that the Constitution works as it does, and the Supreme Court says, but wait a second, what if the president was a king? How about we think about that? So, I mean, it's clearly part of this wider problem, like we saw a few weeks ago, where a U.S. senator was thrown to the ground for asking a question of a member of the cabinet.
Yeah, and hustled out of the room. And to be clear, this is Senator Alex Padilla. Padilla. This is him attending a news conference being given by Kristi Noem, the head of the Department of Homeland Security in California, specifically about the use of federal troops.
Yeah.
In California to enforce ICE raids effectively. So, and what's really interesting is that Senator Padilla is on the senatorial committee that deals with immigration. In other words, this is literally his job, is to provide oversight of executive actions on this very particular situation in his home state.
Yeah, it's also really important to remember that that's the job of a senator is like to go and look at stuff and to make decisions, and then also to they get to vote and have a say about the budgets of these federal agencies. Absolutely. So the government has been preventing these people from getting into all sorts of areas, like the Department of Education, USID, and with the most scrupulous basically they've had the worst possible excuses when they can't get in, but it's all part of the the fascist design
well,
to get us
that's the thing.
thrown away.
You're right, and you're right to link this to that situation in Newark, New Jersey, where there was an attempt to by members of Congress to investigate a detention area for detained immigrants.
Oh, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And the thing is, under U.S. law, and this is explicit in the law, members of Congress have every right to investigate any detention site that they want at any time without providing any prior notice, because, of course, the whole point is not, I'm going to inspect your location in a week, so make sure everything's nice and tidy before I get there. It's to say, I'm here to check and see how things are before you've had a chance to tidy things up.
Yeah.
I want to know if things are working well or not.
Exactly.
And so you had Alina Habba, So, Trump's personal lawyer, who is currently
acting.
She's not even acting. She's not even the acting prosecutor here or acting attorney general. She is like a step below that because she hasn't been confirmed. She's not.
Right.
There's no confirmation hearings whatsoever.
So
she's a temporary. She's acting in a temporary capacity, and in about 90 days, that period's up. So she hasn't got much more time, basically, to pretend that she's a proper lawyer. She really isn't a proper lawyer at all.
Yeah. What happened to Padilla? So he goes and he asks a question.
Yeah. And immediately, thugs, and there's no other way to describe it, because they're not They do not identify themselves. They're not in uniform, basically. They're just sort of like thugs, and they grab him and they hustle him out of the room and they throw him to the ground and they handcuff his hands behind his back.
Yeah.
They have no legal reason to do this. Now, if you are an officer of the state and you take an action that you have no legal basis for doing, like grabbing U.S. senator and throwing him to the ground and, handcuffing his hands behind his back, what you have done is you have engaged in assault, battery, false imprisonment.
And also, you've battered a legislator, which is a no-no.
Which is quite the no-no. Funnily enough, the people who write the laws really don't like it when people attack them physically. So I really hope that he brings suit against those people in their personal capacity. But I also hope that he brings that suit as well against the Department of Homeland Security, because this is absolutely insupportable. You cannot have this. This is dictatorship. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, there's a crime. It's literally called assaulting, kidnapping, and assassinating government officials in the United States. You can't do it. It's 18 USC something 11 111.
It's a bad deal. It's a bad thing. And once again, like, he had every right to be there. It was open to the public. She was literally giving a press conference to answer questions. He had every right to ask questions because his job is to provide oversight specifically of her department.
Yeah. And
specifically on this issue and specifically in his home state. Like, this is so overdetermined, it's not even funny.
And yet,
for some reason, the fact that the government seems to be perfectly fine with breaking the law, this doesn't seem to be a big story. The New York Times doesn't seem to really worry its pretty little head about that too much. It's too busy telling people not to list Zohran Mamdani in the New York primary for the mayor,
who we will discuss in a little bit. Mm-hmm. So let's take a little break right now, and we'll be back in just a second.
Yeah, take a few moments, relax, and consider the collapse of constitutional law of the United States.
All right. And we are back.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was the pause that refreshes. I hope you feel ready for even more madness.
Now, before we talk about the wild New York Democratic mayoral primary, something else has been happening in the world. Tons of stuff is happening all over the place. But in this particular case, it's been happening between Israel and Iran.
Oh, yes.
So Israel has decided to engage in another war.
Yeah.
They've been doing a lot of bombing in the Middle East over the past 18 months. And so they decided Iran needed a few bombs going at their nuclear plant, the nuclear facilities. So yeah, that happened. But of course, Trump didn't feel like being left out of it.
No.
So he decided to have America join in. And
Yay!
That's what we want to talk about today.
Exactly. I'd just like to take a moment, Chris, if I may, to deliver a personal message to every anti-war member of the left who decided that genocide Joe Biden was just a bridge too far, and Kamala Harris just hadn't distanced himself enough from Joe Biden's actions backing Israel and supplying weapons for the ongoing, just clusterfucking Gaza, and decided that Trump is the real candidate for peace. He's the real anti-war candidate. Congratulations, you played yourselves.
Yeah. You once again, the left did what it's supposed to do, and it's supposed to split, and you split over the most ridiculous of reasons. You believed Trump, or if you didn't believe Trump, you wanted to punish the Democrats, which is kind of like saying, I hate my house, but I don't have anywhere else to live, so I'm going to burn down my house.
Yeah, and that'll
don't worry. But don't worry, I'll still have a place to live after I burn down my house.
Absolutely, right?
So that's gonna be great. For those of you who have been under a rock for the past week, or a week or two, Israel started a bombing campaign of Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran retaliated and started bombing Tel Aviv and other defense structures and apparatuses in it's hard to call it mainland Israel. The big cities, the big cities in Israel, and it didn't just end immediately. So Donald Trump decided to jump in and say, I'm going to solve for the Middle East crisis, over this particular Middle East crisis. So he jumped in and he said, I think he bombed Iran, and then he said, now the bombing is over. There's a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, and everything is fine. I have solved it. It was a 12-day war. We're going to call it the 12-day war, but it wasn't a war because when the bombing started, when Israel started bombing Iran, Mark Rubio put out a message as the Secretary of State saying, we had no idea about this. We had nothing to do with this. This is Israel doing its own thing. And then a little while later, Trump comes through and says, hey, guess what, guys? I knew about it all along. It was all part of my plan. I'm involved. I'm deeply involved. And
absolutely.
Then,
My favorite bit was when Hegseth, also known as Whiskey Leaks, the guy in charge of the Defense Department, to our everlasting shame and discredit, put out a statement saying, this is not about regime change. This is purely about preventing Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. And then like an hour later, Trump puts out a tweet saying, regime change is such a bad word, but I think regime change is great.
I know.
Let's make Iran great again. Miga. Yeah, that's some excellent frickin' work there. That is an administration firing on all cylinders, where clearly it's not being led by a passel of drunken baboons.
Yeah, no, the administration is clearly covering itself in glory on this one, especially because so Trump puts out his tweets that are supposed to stop all the fighting. And so I see on all the screens over here in London, they say ceasefire declared between Iran and Israel. And Trump is running out there saying, I did it, guys. And mission accomplished. He puts it right there on the ship. And he says, he's not on the ship, but you know what I mean. Mission accomplished.
Exactly.
You know,
ready to go.
And I think about 63 seconds later, Israel's like, hey, guess what? We got more rockets.
Yeah.
So
they still got planes.
Iran's like,
they still got
bombs. Drones, rockets, bombs. And they started firing at each other again. So the next day, Trump just looks like a total horse's ass.
Of course he does.
Which is surprising because he gets everything right all the time. He's the smartest, most physically fit guy I've ever met.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. No, and he's the best boxer in all of Uganda, Chris. I will have you know.
He's never lost a foot race.
And he's the last king of Scotland.
Yeah. Well, yes, he is. So and then of course, kind of the highlight of this is for my part is when Trump was asked about all of this. I think it was on Wednesday, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday of this week. Basically they said, wait a second, you declared a ceasefire, and he just lost it. He cracked like a dry twig, and he's just like, you know what, these guys have been fighting each other for all these years, and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. And as much as I cannot stand and despise him, I'm just like, hey, that's the first human thing I've ever heard him say.
That's kind of true.
Like
that's kind of true.
He descended into this thing thinking like, oh, I'm just going to fix it. I'm just going to tell them to stop, and they have to because I'm the president. You got to do what I say. Hey, you know, I'm from New York. And guess what? They're like, hey, we're not going to do that. And you're going to do what I say. And it made him look like a total mug. And then he has to wake up in the morning, get up on television before he goes off to NATO and the G7. Right. And like, just, you know, if this is any other president, if there's any other politician, you would have not been able to see the regular television coverage for all the people that would be telling him that he was an incompetent boob, you know, but we don't live in normal times. So Fox News is trying to say that everything's fine. Everyone else is like trying to massage the truth because they don't want to get sued by the Trump administration.
Exactly. Because everyone's terrified of what that man could do to them. And they haven't yet learned the lesson that many of the United States' premier law firms have learned, which is when the government comes after you in an illegal, unconstitutional way, you tell them to fuck themselves. And you fight with every last fiber of your being because that's the only way you're going to get them to back off. And also, you're going to win that fight because Donald Trump is nowhere near as strong as he thinks he is. He is kind of amazingly weak when you get right down to it.
And he's not popular.
No. In fact, on immigration, according to, I think it's the most recent Gallup poll, his approval on immigration, which is traditionally his strongest, issue, is he's 16 points underwater, Chris.
16 points, 16%. So they take all the people that agree with what he says and take all the people that disagree, and the approval rating on that is negative 16.
It's 41 to 57. 41 approve, 57 disapprove. Yeah.
So that's almost 60% of those polled don't agree with his immigration policy, which is the only thing that the administration and the MAGA movement have to hang their hat on. They have everything in MAGA relies on vilifying brown immigration, and you have 60% of people in America saying, "Wait, what are you doing? This is totally wrong."
In fact, the percentage of people who favor a pathway to legal status for undocumented immigrants in the United States has risen 14 points.
14%.
Since 14 percentage points, since Trump became president again. So it's now like around 60% approval for the idea of, no, let's offer regularized legal status for people who live here and work and pay taxes and aren't freaking criminals.
And as an immigrant nation, we should be more willing to accept, immigrants, because that's how the country was founded and taken away from Native Americans. But that's how the country was founded. And it's supposed to be this theoretical, melting pot or salad or whatever you want to call it, of different cultures and peoples, because that's what America was supposed to be all about, not just a giant white party with bad potato salad.
Yeah. Unless, of course, you're one of the actually existing originalists, in which case you do believe that the only Americans that are really meant by the phrase "we the people" are white men who own land.
Which apparently somebody from the University of Florida Law School does think.
Yeah.
So another reason to hate the Gators.
Yeah, I gotta say, U of F is not covering itself in glory here. For those of you who haven't heard of this, basically, one of the members of the law school, one of the students there, wrote a whole essay about how the real Americans are only white men who own land. The 14th Amendment apparently doesn't exist as far as this guy is concerned. It's originalism in its purest white supremacist version.
Absolutely.
And how did the dean of the law school react to this essay, Chris?
Yeah, so he went into his desk, and instead of picking out the disqualified and kicking you out of school thing, he gave the guy an award.
Yeah, gave him an award specifically for that paper.
Specifically for the paper. Congratulations, you knocked it out of the park. All of the students of color, get out. You can't get a law degree because nothing applies to you. Get back in the fields. Yeah,
that's more or less it. So I would say this is one of the situations where the mask is coming off, but let's be brutally frank with ourselves. It ain't a mask, it's a hood.
Yeah. So and that takes us on to something a little bit more fun.
Oh, thank God.
Something more fun. So over the past few days, another thing has been happening that hasn't been bombings or the Labor Party collapsing. You have a now left-wing Democratic mayoral candidate in New York City.
A left-wing Democrat winning a primary, Chris?
Yes. I thought
that was impossible. I thought that couldn't possibly happen.
Well, I mean, how is it supposed to happen? I mean, a left-wing, the Democratic candidate who's not talking about keeping the rich somehow has beaten, and this is true, Andrew Cuomo.
Wait, now Andrew Cuomo, he was the ex-governor of New York who was a Democrat, but who used his power to keep the Republicans in charge of the Senate, even after the Democrats had gained more votes in the Senate, and also sexually assaulted and harassed multiple women who worked for him,
14,
and resigned in disgrace.
In utter disgrace.
Is that the Andrew Cuomo we're talking about?
That's the Andrew Cuomo we're talking about. And up until about 3 weeks ago, he was leading in the polls to become the Democratic nominee because the other, I think, former Democrat, Eric Adams, who was the current the current mayor of New York City, is or was under investigation. I don't know if Trump is part of it.
He was under, more than investigation. He was under indictment. He had been indicted for his corruption.
Massive, stupid corruption, by the way. Quick story. He was taking Turkish airline flights, and he was getting free flights to Turkey on Turkish Airlines and never told anybody about them. And
he was in the pay of the Turkish government.
Yeah, he was basically being paid by a foreign government, the mayor of New York City. So this guy had to stop being a Democrat because obviously the Democrats had disowned him. Because that's what Democrats do. They disown people who commit crimes and not make them president.
It's really weird. It's like they find out that a guy that is in their party is like a criminal and like, well, then we don't like you being in our party anymore, actually. That's funny. What do Republicans do, Chris?
Oh, Republicans wrap their arms around them and
make them president. Yes. There we go. Okay.
So we had Eric Adams, who is now independent, who is now completely jumped onto the MAGA, food train because he needs it to not go to jail. Yep. And then we have, so the Democrats needed a new person to run against him. And so they had, I think there were 7 candidates, one of whom was Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York, who resigned in disgrace, and another person whose name is Zohran Mamdani.
Yeah, Zohran Mamdani.
Mamdani. Yep. So many consonants. Zohran Mamdani. And he was really far behind. I mean, really, really far behind. But I remember something popped up on my Instagram saying, put your, number, because they have the alternative vote, I think.
Well, that's it. What they have is ranked voting. And
ranked choice voting.
It is worth taking a little bit of a break just to talk about what that is and why that's so important in this story.
Yeah.
May I, Chris?
Go ahead.
Oh, hooray.
Just remember, we're trying to keep it to under 3 hours. So go ahead.
Okay, right. Okay, so I'm setting my theoretical watch now. But so the Westminster system we were talking about earlier, first past the post, a lot of people run whoever gets the most votes, they win the whole seats. Even if they won, say, 33% of the vote, but everyone else got less than that, they would still win that election.
Yeah.
In the United Kingdom, this is how we elect people to Parliament. In the United States House of Representatives and the Senate, this is how we elect people to those positions as well. And it means that you don't need a majority. You just need to be better than everybody else.
You need to have one more than everybody else. So if 10 people, if 10 people are running, you want to be the one person that gets 11 votes and everybody else gets like 9.
And there you go. And then you win the whole seat. So what's interesting there is that you would expect that to lead to, a smaller number of parties, a smaller number of candidates, because you don't want to vote for a spoiler. It's just going to ruin everything. So clearly, you would expect there to be a relatively small number of parties and a small number of candidates when you've got that system. And that is, for the most part, what we see. However, it can lead to situations where someone gets elected who the vast majority are totally against, really didn't want that dude in, but that dude had a plurality. He had a slightly bigger chunk than anyone else did.
Had one more than everybody else.
Exactly. Ranked choice is a way to sort of deal with that problem, to eliminate it. And the way that it happens is when you cast your vote, you don't just say, I picked this dude over those dudes. Instead, you say, I like this candidate the most, so I'm going to give her my first round vote.
Right.
And I like this candidate second most. So if I can't have my preferred candidate, if she can't win, here's who I want to come. Here's who I want my vote to go to next. And
it's the alternative vote.
Exactly. So, and it's quite a nice system, because what happens is everyone votes. The votes are counted. Their first round ballots are counted.
Yeah.
If someone gets a majority, boom, done. We have an election.
Yeah.
If no one gets a majority, whoever came in last, they're eliminated. But the people who voted for that person, their votes get distributed to their second preference. And then they tabulate again. And if there's a majority, the election's done. Hooray. And if not, you eliminate the person who came in last and you redistribute their votes. No matter who you vote for, your vote is not wasted.
Exactly. Well, yeah. In this particular, I have concerns, but you're right. Yes.
Well, it's the argument in favor of it is that you can express your preferred preference in the first round. Everyone can see who it is that people really like. But whoever ends up actually crossing that 50% threshold is someone that at least 50% of people are okay with. Like, they'll take him over the alternatives.
Yeah.
And so the argument is that this allows for a greater number of people to run in an election. It allows for a greater understanding of what it is the voters are actually looking for. Voters can learn what it is that they're looking for, because you no longer have to worry about strategic voting clouding the field. So, people vote for Andrew Cuomo because not that they like him, but because they're just desperate to keep the Republican out. And therefore they have to coalesce around whatever they get thrown by the party. Instead, you could have, say, well, what happened here, which is that it turned out that Zohran Mamdani was just way more popular than Andrew Cuomo was. And when they tabulated the first round votes, Mamdani had come up with, I think, 44%.
43.5, yeah.
Yeah, and Cuomo was far behind that. What did Cuomo end up getting in the first round, Chris? Do you have those numbers?
I don't yet. Oh, wait, no, Cuomo got 36.4.
Yeah, and that's not great for him because the guy who came in third, Brad Lander, I believe his name is, he and Mamdani had basically made an electoral alliance saying, if you like me, rank this guy next.
Yeah.
And what that meant is that when the second round happens, eventually Lander's votes will get redistributed, and the vast majority of them are almost certainly going to go to Mamdani. Basically, there is just no way for Cuomo to win, and there's no way for anyone other than Mamdani to win, which means Mamdani has won, and Cuomo has already conceded.
Yeah, so he's already conceded, and so therefore it means that Zohran Mamdani will be the Democratic candidate for the mayor of New York, running against independent Eric Adams.
And the Republican Curtis Sliwa, who is the guy who founded the Guardian Angels, who
oh my God.
Oh yeah, did you not know this, Chris?
No.
Yeah, he's the guy who founded the Guardian Angels. So you want to mention to our loyal fan base who the Guardian Angels are?
Jeez, Guardian Angels are this. How is the best way to describe them? It's this group of guys who are they're just walking on the streets, right?
Yeah, they wear berets. They wear sunglasses.
They wear the berets, the sunglasses in the 1980s, and they wear they were kind of a big deal in the 1980s, and they basically were a bunch of civilians who patrolled the streets, vigilante style.
Yeah,
to try to stop crime, or at least try
to by being there and
pointing.
Looking vaguely tough. And so
pointing and we're opposed to this. So okay, so we're not going to talk about him anymore.
I think we've said everything that needs to be said about this.
Yeah, but now one of the things that's really interesting about this victory for Mamdani is that the amount of things that were thrown at him. The Cuomo campaign, I think they spent like $20 million trying to oppose him. He was accused of anti-Semitism because he's pro-Palestinian. And just for a second, I mean, and that's kind of another bigger issue as well. Like briefly, is it anti-Semitic to be pro-Palestinian? And therefore, and there's that big wobbly gray area where somebody might be pro-Palestinian and might say the wrong thing, and try to collate being Jewish with being pro-Israeli or Israeli at all.
Right.
But Mamdani was basically, he's like, he has no issue with Jewish people. He has an issue with the war that Israel started in Gaza. Because of the October 7th attacks, which he has openly said, we're discussing travesty, right? Yeah. I'm saying he said he did not agree with them. He wasn't thumbing up anything. He was saying that was obviously a crime, right?
Yeah.
But
and that's the thing, right? Is that like as far as any reasonable person who's not coming at this from the standpoint of I've got a dog in this fight, but rather in this coming from the standpoint of It's bad when innocent people get murdered. That is a bad thing, and I am against such things. And I think that's one of those things you have to really drink some Kool-Aid before you can get to the point of being like, you know what, I'm happy that innocent people are murdered.
Yeah.
But so any reasonable person says, oh, October 7th, oh my God, that was horrifying. 1,000 innocent people are killed. That is just horrific. You can't do that. That's obscene. And any reasonable person looks at, well, we're trying to get this one guy who's a member of Hamas, so we're going to blow up his apartment building with his family and all the families around him, and we're going to kill them all so we can get that one dude because, he works for Hamas, so that's why the whole apartment block has to go. That you look at that and say, no, that's disproportionate, that's horrific, that's killing a shit ton of innocent civilians, and that's also wrong.
Both things are bad. And, And it's another thing that I find concerning is that obviously it feels in this particular case that the anti-Semitism attack was used to just shut down, all conversation that he's having about himself or about his policies, and therefore, I mean, I think they're trying to make him, he's a socialist, but he's an anti-Semite.
He's a democratic socialist.
But he is a socialist, and that's not a bad word. I mean,
I know.
Socialism is,
one of the biggest changes, I think.
Yeah, it is one of the biggest changes. And he wants to raise the minimum wage in New York to like $30 an hour.
Mm-hmm. And they're talking about like having free bus fare. They're talking about, moving much more money, I think, into solving the housing crisis in New York. He's put forward an incredibly bold platform. And I'm not here to say that it's going to work beautifully or even that it will work at all. But it is a hell of an indication that I think a lot of people in U.S. politics are sick to death of a choice between fascist madness and, well, we can't make anything better, so we're just going to, focus on not making them worse. In other words, I think what we're seeing here is a sort of rejection of the Keir Starmer style politics of,
capitulation. It's the thing that everybody was really surprised and really happy that he won. And obviously now, God help his family, God help anyone he's ever talked to, God help his, college transcripts, because the right-wing press and also the New York Times, these people, his life is about to be turned upside down because his vision for what he represents is a better way to put this. What he represents for America is that a left-wing candidate who has a clear kind of plan for everybody, not just for a small portion of people, is surprisingly popular.
It's so weird. It's so weird how that happens.
And it's like you catering to the billionaire class isn't working, but the DNC still doesn't seem to understand that. We still have we have Democratic senators and representatives are like, well, I'm going to write a strongly worded letter, and I'm going to ask these hard questions. Like, no, stop asking questions. Start going and getting in people's faces. You don't have to break into an airbase and start paint planes,
right?
But
which, as we all know, is terrorism. Well, and obviously on the same level as attempting to overthrow the government.
Exactly. Which you can read more about that in the paper. But there is clearly the AOCs, the Bernies, the Zohrans, I'd even say J.B. Pritzker, who,
this is the thing. There's an overlap with the ideological question in the Democratic Party, but I think really it's not so much like, are you on the left or on the center or on the right of the party? It's much more, have you recognized the stakes and have you realized that you need to put forward a positive vision? Otherwise, the extreme right will win by default.
Yeah, exactly. I think what the problem is that they don't fully believe the stakes. They don't understand the stakes. They're not because the Democrats have lost the two biggest and most important elections in American history. Yeah. They shat all over the first one in 2016, thinking that, I don't have to go to Wisconsin. I don't have to go to Michigan. Right. Hillary. And they, would Bernie have won in 2016? Maybe.
I think an argument can be made. It's not a given because nothing is given in this.
It's not a given. And I mean, given.
Yeah. At the very least, we know that the campaign that Hillary ran won a majority of the votes, but that doesn't matter when you got to win the Electoral College.
That's true. That's right.
This is strategic failure. And then with 2024, I think what we had there was Joe Biden not being able to relinquish power, even as it became really clear that he was asking a lot for people to look at him physically fade, even if his mind was still sharp.
Yeah.
Physically, he was just not doing well, and it was coming off incredibly poorly. And unless they, for some reason, thought that, oh well, he'll snap out of it any day now, and he'll be back to youthful vigor and all that.
Yeah,
I can't believe they actually thought that, but they just kept him in the race too long. Kamala Harris did not have enough time to be able to build her own campaign. And then her campaign promptly decided to make a terrible mistake after having a wonderful first 2 weeks, building up an incredible head of steam, to then say, all right, it's enough. Time to stop talking about how weird the Republicans are, because that's bad somehow. And instead, it's time to start putting Liz Cheney up so everyone could see that we are on the same page as the Warhawks.
Yeah, well, I think more importantly, it is the appeal, like I would talk about with Keir Starmer earlier in the Labour Party. It's the appeal to the theoretical center-right, who, they don't really lose that much because they're on the right wing of politics. They may not agree with the collapse of liberal democracy, but are they going to cry over some immigrants getting thrown into a van? Probably not for long, So again, I think the message here is that you got to stop appealing to, one, the hyper rich, and two, to those who are never going to vote for you anyway. If they're going to come over, they have to walk themselves out of that forest, right?
Yeah, and I think that's really quite true. It's very strange, because you would think that if you were trying to assemble a coalition, you'd be saying to yourselves, okay, what are the major problems that exist in society? What kinds of issues can we focus on where the majority is going to be on our side of this issue? How can we link those together to create, a unifying narrative that explains to people who we are and what it is that we want to do? You would look at society and say, okay, well, what do we work with here? What you wouldn't do is say, all right, well, we've inherited this coalition and we're going to ignore it so that we could try to we'll let part of it fall away. It's fine. It's fine.
Exactly.
Because we're going to go after these guys who have never voted for us before. And hate us and think that we are the literal devil.
Think that we drink kids' bloods, or, at the very least, that we're going to raise their taxes to the point of that they might have to not make, as much money,
And really, Chris, when you get right down to it, what's worse? The blood drinking or the slightly higher taxes?
If taxes are raised, I really don't care if there's a democracy, but if my taxes are really low, then I'm happy with you throwing people into vans and stuff and disappearing people and pushing them out of helicopters, because
there you go.
3% taxes, come on, doesn't get much better than that. But hey, listen, those Middle Eastern countries, they got 0% taxes and everything is fine with them.
Exactly.
So, that's where we are this week. We're doing a little bit longer, and hopefully by the time you hear this, all of our content will be up and on the various streaming or
soon
podcasting things.
You will be able to listen to us as you do the dishes, because you won't have to have your phone in your pocket on YouTube and have it constantly be like, oh no, I turned around a little bit too quickly and now it's paused and skipped forward to the next video, which explains how to play frickin' Hearts of Iron 4 or whatever the hell. I don't know what you guys are into.
Whatever you're into, we're happy to hit it. Hit us in the comments and let us know what you're into. And like and subscribe.
Do you agree? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, we were supposed to do that at the beginning of this, and we definitely didn't.
But that's true. So bad at this.
We are not good at the algorithm baiting.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a good talk. And as always, I'm Dr. Silverstein.
I'm Dr. Armshaw.
And we are doctors,
but not doctors.
Good night.